Hello friends, today we're going to be talking about Chiron in the sign of Aries. And this is important because Chiron's wrapping things up. It's going to dip into the sign of Taurus and then come back one last time into the sign of Aries. But this transit of Chiron for the past 8 years has been quite challenging, especially psychologically. Chiron has been exposing some uncomfortable truth within us because that's what this planet does. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we've negotiated our will away. There's been a part of us that have wanted to move forward, while other parts of us hesitated and kept us back. There's been other parts of us that really wants freedom. That's what the sign of Aries is about. But there's another part of us that submitted and we didn't allow ourselves to be free because we know how much freedom demands of us. And this is a sign of action. So we wanted to act, but we kept remembering previous failures, rejections, humiliation, conflict, loss, and in general, prior pains. And since this transit was 8 years long, it's affected us. Some of us have, when we look back, we spend a lot of time second guessing ourselves, second guessing our instincts, suppressing our initiative, and just constantly monitoring ourselves. But Chiron wanted to show us how we've organized ourselves and our life around fear, safety, attachment, predictability, or self-protection or self-preservation. It's been showing us how we've disconnected from our own life force, from our own sense of courage, our vitality, direction, and our right to just exist unapologetically. These are the wounds that Chiron has been revealing to us for the past 8 years. And this transit, Chiron in itself, is not just about wounds the way that it's always explained. It's always showing us what the wounds have done to us after a lifetime of living with them. And Chiron in Aries wants to show us the wounds that we've been carrying and what it's done to our will. But now Chiron's preparing to leave. And this feels like culmination of 8 years of confrontation with our courage, our sense of individuality, our instincts, our self-determination, and our ability to move through life from the center of our own being. So in this video, I really want to first look at what Chiron symbolizes, and then what Chiron in Aries has been revealing to us. And I would say that these final moments of Chiron before dipping into Taurus and giving us a preview of what's coming up, it's given us an opportunity to take stock of everything that we've gone through, to get better self-awareness, because this Chiron is going to come back one more time into Aries. Actually, let me give you all of the dates. So Chiron has been in Aries. It ingressed into Aries on April 17th of 2018. It will briefly leave Aries on June 20th of 2026. And it will be back here again September 2026. And it will depart and will not come back here for another 52 years. And that final departure is April 14, 2027. And I do want to say this, for those of you who are born between 1968 and 1977, you've been having your Chiron return. So this is the tail end of it. And Chiron return ends most definitely by the time one is 52. So if you are around that age range, you are going through your Chiron return, which is another layer of meaning. But before getting into the depth of this video, as some of you know, I had to take 2 weeks off. Life went crazy. That video that I made about Sati moon conjunct Saturn and the kind of havoc it brings, yours truly here is having some of those experiences. But now I'm back and I'm going to cover the transits for June. And oh my God, June is not like May. There's just so much going on and happening. It's a different ball game altogether. So I'll be making those videos, and I'm actually going to make a few nakshatra videos this month too. And the next one will be about Saturn has already ingressed into the nakshatra of Revati. I want to discuss that. That one's super important because it has to do with our sense of nurturance and direction in this life. So that'll be an upcoming video as well. And if you want to catch all of these videos and more, please do subscribe, press that notification bell so YouTube notifies you when the videos are released. And now, without further ado, let's just go through each layer and start with Chiron and see what Chiron means. So we have to backtrack a little bit to Greek mythology because that's where Chiron comes from. Chiron is a centaur, half human, half horse. But in its narrative, Chiron's depicted very differently than the other centaurs because they represent unrestrained instincts. They're saying something or symbolizing our animal instinct, which is before our human socialization. We're all kind of like that when we're born. And eventually we get this civilization project of humanity embedded within us. The centaurs are saying it's something before that. And that's why they symbolize impulse, instinct, appetite, aggression, intoxication, and being very reactionary. But Chiron, very different. And I think this has something to do with part of his lineage because he's the son of Kronos, aka Saturn, and his mother was a nymph, and her name is Philyra. And he had an external influence in his life, which was Apollo. So Apollo was the one that cultivated Chiron. And I think all of the symbolism matter because his mother, who's a nymph, she's symbolizing something of nature, pure nature, instinct, and just living with the forces of life. But his father, Kronos, is associated with time, order of time, as structure that also has consequences. And we know Saturn also represents limitations, but is the kind of limitation that becomes a catalyst for consciousness. And he also represents preservation of power. But his teacher, Apollo, is the one that introduces him to music, reason, refinement, healing, philosophy, and in general, ways of being that gives you a higher consciousness. So unlike the other centaurs that are representing instincts, Chiron becomes an instinct that's been educated. He's the higher and more cultivated consciousness. And he's been described as wise, disciplined, educated, reflective, and deeply skilled. And as we all know him, he was a healer. He was also an astrologer, the way that he's described in some stories, philosopher, musician himself, and a teacher of heroes. So at the most basic and fundamental level, Chiron has a lot of resemblance to us humans. His nature is like our human nature, which is the way our raw instincts can exist beside our socialization and our cultivation. It's saying that we all have the animal desires, but they're existing alongside our human ethics. And I think Chiron's also telling us, which is going to become part of his healing and his teaching, that we can't escape our animal nature. We're just these instinctual creature who has this exceptional capacity to become aware of ourselves. And really what that means is that the animal in us has no choice but to move through existence. And the way that it's moving, it's based on the external forces that are pressing up against it. But at the same time, the human understands time and consequences. We have this capacity to anticipate outcomes, interpret events beyond their immediate factual occurrence. So we have this ability to reflect upon ourselves, on others, time in an abstract way, and imagine a future. So in many ways, the story of Chiron in itself is telling us something about the burden of being conscious. And that's because consciousness deepens our encounter with reality, which is Saturn itself again, which is his father. And again, considering he is the son of Saturn, he must instinctually, as part of his own instinct, have an innate understanding about life's pain. That's just part and parcel with existing as a human, as a nymph, or as a god. So now we have to consider another component feature of Chiron, which of course is his wound. And when we look at his stories, Chiron is accidentally shot by a poison arrow from Hercules. And this happens while Hercules is fighting the other centaurs. And we also have to remember that Hercules' arrow was dipped in the toxic blood of a hydra, and it accidentally hits Chiron in the knee. But Chiron is immortal. He can't die. So the wound becomes a living wound, something that's going to be eternal and something that he can't fully heal, because our wounds last as long as we do. As mortals, we are wounded so long as we're alive. When that life ends, it ends. At least the shape and the form of the wound, the way that we carry it. We can transmit it, the toxins, to other people and they create their own wounds. But the shape and the form of our wound is very unique to who we are. And going back to the myth, when you read mythology in general, no word should be taken for granted. Everything is symbolizing something. And I think in this story, it's worth remembering that the wound of Chiron comes from his good friend Hercules. It's not coming from his enemy. It comes through an accident. It's not intentional. These are very important to remember. And it's coming through another's lack of precision rather than through deliberate malice. And if you think about it, this is revealing something about the nature of life itself. It's talking about the human condition. And it's saying that we all carry wounds, but not all of those wounds are imprints left because of another's cruelty. Yes, sometimes we're wounded by careless others, sometimes from other people's lack of knowing, sometimes it's just by mistake or by coincidence. So we have to be very careful where we feel wounded, how we are attributing it to some aspect of the world. This is very important because when something hurts, we automatically need a cause for it. And we have to be careful who we hold responsible for that wound, especially if we want to remedy it. And I want us to just take note of something else in the story. He gets wounded by the most highly praised warrior that there is, Hercules. Even him, with all of his strength, conquest, greatness, practice, he accidentally shot his own best friend. And it's important because it's showing us even when there's skills involved, yes, it can come from carelessness, but even human beings that are around us who are skilled can unintentionally create harm. All it takes is one moment of unawareness. And even those who are the strongest people in our lives that protect us can harm us. And even the strongest cannot sometimes protect us. And we have to consider something else. Chiron is not exactly a flimsy character. He himself is very wise and refined. And this is telling us something very painful again about existing in general, which is even wisdom doesn't exempt us from suffering. So that means we can be conscious, we can be ethical, disciplined, psychologically developed, and still become wounded in this life. Just the fact that we participate in existence renders us vulnerable to a whole bunch of wounds in this life. And some of them will last for the entirety of our life. Even though we're talking about a myth, the myth in itself is dismantling our human fantasy. That awareness and knowledge is going to grant us immunity from life. If we pay attention, this story is telling us that to exist at all requires us to become vulnerable to life's collisions, that there will be accidents. Even some of our best intents will have consequences. We will experience injuries, injustice, and loss. And sometimes some of these things never leave us. And I think the arrow, having that toxin at the tip of it, is showing us this. Because when that toxin gets in his system, it's alive. It remains active in his system for all eternity, which is why he can't heal himself. Because no matter what he does, that poison's active within him. And this is also important because it's telling us we might experience trauma, but just because the moment of that trauma ends, it doesn't mean the trauma ends. It's just ongoing and continuous. Our pains, generally the ones that become our wounds, they just tend to circulate through us, through our emotions, through our thoughts, somatic pain in the body. And because of it, they shape our perception. It changes our sense of trust, our expectations, and in general, how we're able to move in the world and feel a sense of fluidity in it. It's almost as if we have a script now in our head in terms of how life is going to unfold, how the self is going to feel through this life. So the story is showing us through this eternal wound, how our own psyches that can come to reorganize itself around all of the things that have happened in the past, not what's happening in the present, not all the possibilities that could be in the future, just what has entered us and now lives within us from the past. It's like constantly living life through that hurts and the way that we were injured. Because something could have a straight path. Something injured that body part. Now there's a curvature on that body part. So nothing can move through in a straight line anymore. Every time something comes in, it has to go around to go out. So this is our own perception also does this. It stays, it leaves an imprint, an impression on our minds. So symbolism of Chiron is telling us something super profound, which is that pain doesn't just affect us. It comes to reshape and restructure our relationship to existence itself. It forces us to adapt around the wound. It comes to change our behavior, decisions, and the way that we're able to move through life. The wounds that we carry, they create a protection mechanism. Like if you have a wound anywhere on your body, you're so cautious about that body part in terms of how you move. What might touch it? I don't want to touch anything. I don't want it to get infected. We're constantly compensating, avoiding, suppressing, and just becoming super hyper vigilant around this wound. And the ones that we carry internally, we do the same thing, even though we don't necessarily see it like a wound on an arm. So when we go to Chiron in your chart, wherever it's sitting, in whichever sign, in whatever house, it's saying that there's a kind of a wounding in that part of life. There's unresolved pain. And this pain has become integrated into your consciousness in terms of who you are and how you operate and function in the world. Wherever Chiron's sitting is showing you where our instincts have become divided. And that is showing us where our life force has been interrupted. Because, we always praise our socialization, but it's taking something away from us. It is a kind of a wounding when you think about it. Like the joy of just being in your body, even if it comes to defecation, like a child doesn't care. They're just going to pee and poop everywhere. And that freedom, even though they don't understand is a freedom, it just feels right. But we slowly beat everything out of children and we put this civilization project of humanity into human beings. So we're splitting the instincts. And even if we come from very well-rounded families and background, we still have these in some area of life, in some facet of ourselves. Like wherever Chiron is showing us how our movement in life has been organized around fear. Fear of rejection, fear of consequences, fear of abandonment, fear of. That same placement in the chart is also showing us where our consciousness has been intermingled and interconnected with our prior pain. It's showing us where our mode of adaptation has replaced our active participation, the practice of our will. In general, is showing us how the self has reorganized itself around an injury. And I think the fact that he's a healer, that archetype in itself is showing us that part of the animal instincts, not just the human instinct, is to heal itself. So there's an instinct, even though Chiron represents these things, there's an instinct within us that compels us to heal these wounds, even though they might be eternal for the rest of our life. And oddly enough, healing can only occur as you become more conscious, which in this case, it means learning how to move through existence as existence is unfolding. And that includes with our wounds. And I think Chiron wants to show us through its narrative that our wounds can never fully disappear. The self is configured around wounds. That's what makes you you. That's what makes you beautiful and unique too. And we see this in his own story. He comes to accept that there's this wound. Because when he realizes that he can never fully heal this wound, and the poison will always be within him, and that he will always be in this tremendous amount of suffering, he ultimately in the story surrenders his immortality. And if you think about it symbolically, this matters a lot. This does not mean give up on life. It's actually showing us part of that wisdom, that consciousness, the maturity is about acceptance, which means acceptance of our limitations. This is what our wound has done to us. And it only hurts because it has limited us. It has made us feel more vulnerable. And if we come to realize that with or without wounds, that's part of the human condition, to be limited and to be vulnerable, the wound in itself doesn't feel so outrageous anymore. It's shown us that existence in itself contains suffering. And it's not something that we can completely escape. Because even a person who comes to, let's say, accept their death, this is a very strange thing a human being has to grapple with at the beginning of life. The idea of dying is absurd. But as you live through life, life in itself puts you through so much that you get to a point of acceptance eventually. Some people can check out very gracefully and not feel that sense of suffering anymore because there was that mature acceptance about the nature of life itself. And this doesn't mean defeat, to be able to eventually accept and to submit to certain things. And we see this in the story of Chiron. He eventually stops fighting reality. He learns how to surrender to what is. And I think this is probably one of the deepest teachings of the story of Chiron, which is healing is never the complete removal of pain and the suffering that comes from that wound. But sometimes healing is just about learning, which is learning how to stop organizing the entirety of our existence around this wound, around the pain that it's causing. Because it's shown us certain things happen in this life, which is beyond our power to change it. It just requires acceptance. And you know what I've noticed? Every time I have met someone with a kind of a disability, they have another kind of superpower because they had to negotiate how to get through life with that limitation, where other people, 99% of people, cannot do what it is that they do not have the strength that they have. So even our wounds, yes, it redirects us away maybe from the way that we wish to live, we want to live, but it's also doing these other things in the background that's making us stronger. So I think understanding that we can't fully change things is actually a relief in this life because we're all expected to just heal. I'm doing self work. I have to heal myself. That's kind of a burden too. You can be wounded, and that's okay too, because we're all wounded. Life has kicked all of our asses, and it will humble all of us at some point. That's just the nature of being human, being alive. Even animals experience this. But now let's take Chiron into the sign of Aries, and let's see what we've all been dealing with for the past 8 years. So when we get Chiron in Aries, it's showing us what happens when the wound itself enters the principle of emergence. And I say that because Aries regulates or governs our initiative, assertion, instinctual movements, courage, independence, our sense of individuality, and our active participation in life. Aries is the force within us that says, I move because I am. It's the first burst of life into life. It's the spring season, right? It's the instinct within us that initiates, penetrates forward, takes risks. And Aries does not need constant permission to exist, to be, to live, or to act. Now we bring Chiron here for the past 8 years. This was Chiron exposing how this life force that's been invested within us has been compromised. And it's been shown that in terms of the methods that we've employed as a means of adaptation, how we have adapted to certain situations in life just to be able to get through one day to the next day and so on. So lifetime of conditioning has been revealing itself. It's been showing us that we couldn't be fully ourselves because every time we did, we came into these friction points with other people creating unnecessary heat. It showed us that every time we were trying to be direct, we found ourselves in a state of conflict, that our independence threatened other people's attachments, where our assertion was often punished by other people, that every time we moved towards something, we had to lose something, that our individuality could render us being isolated. These are the things that Chiron was revealing to us in the sign of Aries. But it's also been shown us how slowly over the years, over a lifetime, we've reorganized ourselves around self-protection. We've lost that ability to unapologetically exist and just be what we actually are. And it's important to remember that Chiron is not showing us a literal wound, but it's showing us the psychological structures that we built around these wounds. For instance, a lot of us experience this if you already have Chiron in the sign of Aries, that if you had any kind of dependency, whether it was on people, substances, whatever that it was, these dependencies created a situation where you couldn't have self-trust anymore. And it was actually this lack of self-trust that kept feeding into the wound and keeping it active so that we become even over-attached to relationship and different facets of our life. It was showing us how we are, in a very false way, looking for certainty, validation, absolute eternal comfort, which does not exist. That's what those attachments were supposed to do for us, especially since we came to have a lack of trust for ourselves to problem solve. Like Chiron was showing us somewhere along the way, that instinctual confidence that we innately have to be able to move through this world, to fight against it, to negotiate with it was weakened. And this Chiron in Aries has been deeply existential. And that's because this transit for the past 8 years has been showing how difficult it is to live from the core of the self, what the self is made of. It takes so much. It takes all of your life force to be who you are and what you're made of. Like part of the healing process for us with Chiron in Aries and something to reflect on is, how do I direct my own life? How do I trust my own instincts, my own gut feeling? How can I be courageous enough to tolerate the uncertainties of life? I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. How do I get up again and again, do it again and again as a willing participant? It's about understanding how to stand alone when it's necessary. The sign of Aries is a kind of like a loner. It likes to do things by itself. And sometimes we need to stand alone. We need to not be with the herd and the crowd. We need to assert ourselves the way that we need to. Chiron wants to show us this, and it also wants to show us that we have to risk rejection. And we also have to have the bravery and the courage for that. This was really about understanding how to become responsible for our own movement in the world and to, at the same time, have big enough kahunas to do something and stand by its consequences also. Not to defer, deflect, project, reject, but just to move with life. Like one of the things that has happened during this transit is that many of us have discovered that conceptually we want freedom more than anything else. But at the same time, the same transit was showing us how psychologically we're actually organized around this concept of safety or attachment or predictability. We're basically moving around. We want freedom while we're in a state of fear. So this is creating a divide within us. It's polarizing the self. That in itself creates a wound because you can never arrive, you can never leave, you can never achieve, attain, because you're just being pulled and pushed constantly. Chiron's been showing us this. And this was bound to become very obvious to us because Aries is such a raw sign. It's a direct sign, it's a cardinal sign, and fire on top of that. So we were bound to see these contradictions where we're just constantly holding back, but there's this other part of us that needs to fly, that needs to be free. So in a lot of ways, it's been showing us where we've suppressed ourselves and just to preserve particular attachments in this life. And attachments are anti-Aries concepts. It's been constantly showing us how we have negotiated our instincts away. We have met people where we're like, no, that was the first instinct. And somehow we convinced ourselves it's okay. Day after day turned into month after month, years after years. But we knew initially, within that first 30 seconds, we knew that we should have said no. And this Chiron's been showing us how we have abandoned our own direction so many times. And we just sat there hesitating and not crossing that threshold that actually leads to our becoming, to becoming more conscious, as I was describing about the nature of Chiron in its own stories. I know the moment a person is fully themselves, they are an authentic self-expression of what they are. They are free, but at the same time, they are the most responsible person. They have to become responsible. So this Chiron in Aries has been a expensive transit psychologically in a lot of ways, because not only it's been exposing our wounds, how we have reconfigured ourselves around these wounds, but it's also been showing us how we are unfree, and part of the process in healing is to become free. And yet, at the same time, it has also been exposing the cost of what it means to have freedom, which again comes with that tremendous amount of responsibility. And part of that responsibility is to heal the wounds, but also to carry them very courageously through life. It's been quite the journey. We have a little bit more left, and then we are on to the sign of Taurus, which is another ball game altogether. But before closing this video, please do remember to like, share, and subscribe. And please let me know your experiences in the past 8 years with this Chiron in Aries since 2018, to know where you feel that, or where you notice your will, courage, or initiative has been challenged in this life. And I think most importantly at this point, where do you feel like you're ready to move forward? And to move forward unapologetically as you are, who you are. I'd love to know how you guys are experiencing this transit. And if you want a reading of this transit or to understand your birth chart, the experiences that you've had, why you have gone through the things you have gone through, what it all means, and where it's all going, you can go to my website at parisayazdi.com. If it's still under construction, you can come back to this video or any video on this channel. Go to the description box of the video and my email's there. You can email me directly. This website's been taking forever to be updated. Hopefully this week will be done. But if you can't find my email there, it's in the description box below. And now to close. So Chiron's going to leave Aries, go into Taurus briefly this spring, but it will come back into Aries for one more round. And I think this pocket of time where Chiron's not in Aries is for us to reflect and understand this Chiron archetype within, because it's creating enough distance now for us to see what we've been through, that distance, that gap. We have a different viewpoint of it for that few months when Chiron's in Taurus. And I want us to realize the highest expression of this transit is about us reclaiming our alignments. It's about creating correspondence between our I am, our will, and our actions. And I think the lesson is for us to move without being apologetic, to stop fragmenting our force, to stop negotiating against our own nature. I think with Chiron leaving right now too, it's time for us to understand a more mature relationship with the ways that we need to assert ourselves as human beings, to not suppress it. And at the same time, not to take that assertion to weaponize it or to apologize for it on the other end. This was like a lesson of how to make our will conscious in this sign and the kind of consciousness that can direct itself and move in the world. And I think, as I was saying earlier, another huge lesson is that as conscious beings, as these aware beings, we can't remove pain fully from existence. And because our awareness and our consciousness expands our interaction with existence itself, we are more prone to encountering pains and wounds. You know, the more conscious we become, the more we realize every time we move in life, some loss or some consequence happens, even when we think it's good. Because think about it, every time you make a choice, you negate infinite amount of things for that one choice. You just lost all other possibilities. Like every time we commit to something, we also exclude other possibilities again. And we know every act of becoming requires infinite amount of sacrifices. So even when we get what we want, we still have to encounter pain and loss in this existence. Because to choose one path is to surrender every other path. And I think this is part of the burden of being a conscious being to the degree that human beings are. And part of that consciousness is to understand time. So if you understand the past, you can now experience regret. If you understand the future, now you can anticipate and have tremendous amount of anxiety. And I think with Chiron being here and the kind of consciousness that it was giving us is to understand that our actions are shaping our reality. And to live in reality is to incur pain, scars, wounds. And I think Chiron's narrative in itself, its mythology, is telling us the point is not to get rid of these wounds. It's not about the pain disappearing. It's about ultimately understanding that pain is woven into participation of life itself. And like, if you think about it, when you love someone is to become vulnerable to loss. One of the greatest things that could happen to you in this life is to find the love of your life. But the day that you found them, you have been set up now for one of the greatest pains of your life, because one of you will have to die. Or let's just make it a little bit lighter. Every time we act, we have to take that risk of failing. To assert ourselves every time, in every situation, we're risking conflict. And every time we choose to move forward, we have to leave something behind. This is the painful nature of life. And this is why it's so hard to get satisfaction in this life. Because even the things that we want, when we get them, yes, there's always that thing of, okay, what next? But there's also the subconscious level of knowing how much has been lost, how much has been denied and negated just to get to this one point. This is why I'm saying it's almost impossible to escape the human condition and the pain that comes just from existing as a human being. And I want us to realize this is not the failure of existence or the failure of human life. This is just the nature of life in itself, in existence. And I think maturity, and Saturn's here too right now. Saturn's very much contributing to this in the sign of Aries too. Maturity is learning which pain belongs to a life that is actually being lived. Like, is this the right pain for this life, for who I am and what I'm made of? And I keep saying what I'm made of because the sign of Aries has a lot to do with Dharma. It's about the purpose of your existence, why you exist. And that existence in itself is going to have a particular kind of pain, part and parcel with it. And to know that pain and to accept that pain is to live with purpose. But to accept the pain that is not part of what you're made of, that is the wrong pain. And I think that's why the feeling of suffering comes online, which goes far beyond just pain. So again, going back to Chiron's story, the point is not to eliminate the pain, but the goal should be stop organizing ourselves around pain specifically that we do not have to hold. And even the pain that we do have to hold, the way that we reorganize life around it, we should be very conscious of how we're doing it. And I think ultimately, Chiron's reminding us that the human condition can never be perfected to absolute safety, being pain-free, being with absolute certainty and having a complete sense of wholeness. is reminding us there's always vulnerability. There will always be limitations. There will always be mistakes and failures, and that is okay. And I think that's because life itself was never asking us to, hey, you should just remain untouched by existence and by reality. But we could remain conscious and become a participant rather than a recipient who's just things are constantly happening to it. In our today's language, we call that like the victim stance. I feel that in this moment, Chiron's asking us, can you act from your own center? And I think when we talk about the sign of Aries, because of that fire nature of it, that initiative that's here is saying something about our innate potential that's invested in us. And if we want to come close to touching that, understanding what it's about, we have to understand what this chronic internal pain is, because it's creating hesitation, which doesn't allow us to understand what that thing is. And I think at some point, we have to decide to act, to initiate, to confront, and to move despite life's uncertainty, and to stand behind our own actions very courageously. I think all of the crap show that we've gone through in the past 8 years is to arrive to such a moment, to be unapologetically yourself, and of course, not recklessly, but just unapologetically. You have the right to exist and to be as you are, that configuration that you are and how you are made. And this brings us to the end of the video. And before concluding, I'd like to leave us with a wish. I say, may this transit help us reclaim trust in our own will. And may we stop abandoning our own movement out of fear, memory, or prior pain. And may we find the courage to move through life consciously, directly, and again, unapologetically. That's it for today. Sending you much love. Till next time.